Page 108. Where, for example, should we classify the following amusement? 10. Sound effects. The accused is made to stand 20 to 25 feet away and then is forced to speak more and more loudly and to repeat everything. This is not easy for someone already weakened to the point of exhaustion, where 2 megaphones are constructed of rolled up cardboard and 2 interrogators coming close to the prisoner bellow in both ears, "Confess, you rat." The prisoner is deafened. Sometimes he actually loses his sense of hearing, but this method is uneconomical. The fact is that the interrogators like some diversion in their monotonous work, and so they fly in thinking up new ideas. 11. Tickling. This is also a diversion. The prisoner's arms and legs are bound and held down, and then the inside of his nose is tickled with a feather. The prisoner writhes. It feels as though someone were drilling in his brain. 12. A cigarette is put out on the accused's skin, already mentioned above. 13. Light effects involve the use of an extremely bright electric light in the small white-walled cell or box in which the accused is being held, a light which is never extinguished. The electricity is saved by the economics of school children and housewives. Your eyelids become inflamed, which is very painful, and then in the interrogation room, searchlights are again directed into your eyes. 14. Here's another imaginative trick. On the eve of May 1st, 1933, in the Khabarovsk GPU, for 12 hours all night, Ch.3 was not interrogated, no, but was simply kept in a continual state of being led to interrogation. "Hey, you." Hands behind your back, they led him out of the cell, up the stairs quickly into the interrogator's office. The guard left, but the interrogator, without asking one single question, and sometimes without even allowing Ch.3 to sit down, would pick up the telephone, take away the prisoner from 107, and so they came to get him, took him back to his cell. No sooner had he laid down on its board bunk, then the lock rattled. Ch.3 to interrogation, hands behind your back. And when he got there, take away the prisoner from 107. For that matter, the methods of bringing pressure to bear can begin for a long time before the interrogator's office. Prison begins with the box, in other words, what amounts to a closet or packing case. The human being who has just been taken from freedom, still in a state of inner turmoil, ready to explain, to argue, to struggle, is, when he first sets foot in prison, clapped into a box, which sometimes has a lamp and a place where he can sit down, but which sometimes is dark and constructed in such a way that he can only stand, and even then is squeezed against the door. And he is held there for several hours, or half a day, or a day. During those hours he knows absolutely nothing. Will he perhaps be confined there for all his life? He has never in his life encountered anything like this, and he cannot guess the outcome. Those first hours are passing when everything inside him is still ablaze from the unstilled storm in his heart. Some become despondent, and that's the time to subject them to their first interrogation. Others become angry, and that too is all to the good, for they may insult the interrogator right at the start or make a slip, and it will be all the easier to cook up their case. 16. When the boxes were in short supply, we used to have another method in the Novocherkassk NKVD. Iine Strutskaya was forced to remain seated on a stool in the corridor for 6 days in such a way that she did not lean against anything, did not sleep, did not fall off, and did not get up from it. 6 days. Just try to sit that way for 6 hours. Then again, as a variation, the prisoner can be forced to sit on a tall chair of the kind used in laboratories so that his feet do not reach the floor. They become very numb in this position. He is left sitting that way from 8 to 10 hours. Or else, during the interrogation itself, when the prisoner is out in plain view, he can be forced to sit in this way, as far forward as possible on the front edge. Move further forward, further still, of the chair so that he is under painful pressure during the entire interrogation. He is not allowed to stir for several hours. Is that all? Yes, that's all. Just try it yourself. 17. Depending on local conditions, a divisional pit can be substituted for the box, as was done in the Gulag Army camps during World War II. The prisoner was pushed into such a pit, 10 feet deep, 6.5 feet in diameter, and beneath the open sky, rain or shine. This pit was for several days both his cell and his latrine, and 10.5 ounces of bread and water were lowered to him on a cord. Imagine yourself in this situation just after you've been arrested, when you're all in a boil. Either identical orders to all special branches of the Red Army, or else the similarities of their situations in the field led to broad use of this method. Thus, in the 36th Motorized Infantry Division, a unit which took part in the Battle of Kalkitgal, and which was encamped in the Mongolian desert in 1941, a newly arrested prisoner was, without explanation, given a spade by the chief of the special branch, Samuel, and ordered to dig a pit, the exact same dimensions of a grave. Here is a hybridization of physical and psychological methods. When the prisoner had dug deeper than his own waist, they ordered him to stop and sit down on the bottom. His head was no longer visible. One guard kept a watch over several such pits, and it was as though he were surrounded by empty space. They kept the accused in this desert with no protection from the Mongolian sun, and with no warmth against the cold of the night, but no tortures. Why waste effort on tortures? The ration they gave them was 3.5 ounces of bread per day and 1 glass of water. Lieutenant Chopanya, a giant boxer, 21 years old, spent a month in prison this way. Within 10 days he was swarming with lice. After 15 days he was summoned to interrogation for the first time. 18. The accused could be compelled to stand on his knees, not in some figurative sense, but literally on his knees without sitting back on his heels, and with his back upright. People could be compelled to kneel in the interrogator's office or the corridor for 12 or even 24 or 48 hours. The interrogator himself could go home, sleep, amuse himself in one way or another. This was an organized system. Watch was kept over the kneeling prisoner, and the guards worked in shifts. What kind of prisoner was most vulnerable to such treatment? One already broken, already inclined to surrender. It was also a good method to use with women. Ivanov Razumnik reports a variation of it, having set young Lord Kipanza on his knees. The interrogator urinated in his face, and what happened? Unbroken by anything else, Lord Kipanza was broken by this, which shows that the method also worked well on proud people. 19. Then there is a method of simply compelling a prisoner to stand there. This can be arranged so that the accused stands only while being interrogated, because that too exhausts and breaks a person down. It can be set up in another way so that the prisoner sits down during the interrogation, but is forced to stand up between interrogations. A watch is set over him, and the guards see to it that he doesn't lean against the wall, and if he goes to sleep and falls over, he is given a kick and straightened up. Sometimes, even one day of standing is enough to deprive a person of all his strength and force him to testify to anything at all. During all these tortures, which involved standing for 3, 4, or 5 days, they ordinarily deprived a person of water. The most natural thing of all is to combine the psychological and physical methods. It is also natural to combine all the preceding methods with 21. Sleeplessness, which they quite failed to appreciate in medieval times. They did not understand how narrow are the limits within which a human being can preserve its personality intact. Sleeplessness, yes, combined with standing, thirst, bright light, terror, and the unknown. What other tortures are needed? Befogs the reason, undermines the will, and the human being ceases to be himself, to be his own I, as in Chekhov's I Want to Sleep. But there it was much easier, for the girl could lie down and slip into lapses of consciousness, which even in just a minute would revive and refresh the brain. A person deprived of sleep acts half unconsciously or altogether unconsciously, so that his testimony cannot be held against him. They used to say, "You are not truthful in your testimony, and therefore you will not be allowed to sleep." Sometimes, as a refinement, instead of making the prisoner stand up, they made him sit down on a soft sofa, which made him want to sleep all the more. The jailer on duty sat next to him on the same sofa and kicked him every time his eyes began to shut. Here's how one victim, who had just sat out days in a box infested with bedbugs, describes his feeling after this torture. Chill from great loss of blood. Irises of the eyes dried out as if someone were holding a red-hot iron in front of them. Tongue swollen from thirst and prickling as from a hedgehog at the slightest movement. Throat racked by spasms of swallowing. Sleeplessness was a great form of torture. It left no visible marks and could not provide grounds for complaint, even if an inspection, something unheard of anyways, were to strike on the morrow. They didn't let you sleep? Well, after all, this is not supposed to be a vacation resort. The security officials were awake too. They would catch up on their sleep during the day. One can say that sleeplessness became the universal method in the organs. From being one among many tortures to being, it became an integral part of the system of state security. It was the cheapest possible method and did not require the posting of sentries. In all the interrogation prisons, the prisoners were forbidden to sleep even 1 minute from the reveille till taps. In Sukhanovka, the other prisons used specifically for interrogation, the cot was folded into the wall during the day. In others, prisoners were simply forbidden to lie down and even close their eyes while seated. Since the major interrogations were all conducted at night, it was automatic. Whoever was undergoing interrogation got no sleep for at least 5 days and nights. Saturday, Sunday nights, the interrogators themselves tried to get some rest. 22. The above method was further implemented by an assembly line of interrogators. Not only were you not allowed to sleep, but for 3 or 4 days, shifts of interrogators kept you up in a continuous interrogation. 23. The bedbug-infested box has already been mentioned. In the dark closet, made of wooden planks, there were hundreds, maybe even thousands of bedbugs, which were allowed to multiply. The guards removed the prisoner's jacket or field shirt, and immediately the hungry bedbugs assaulted him, crawling onto him from the walls or falling off the ceiling. At first he waged war with them strenuously, crushing them on his body and on the walls, suffocated by their stink. But after several hours he weakened and let them drink his blood without a murmur. 24 punishment cells. No matter how hard it was in the ordinary cell, the punishment cells were always worse. And on return from the ordinary cell always seemed like paradise. In the punishment cell, a human being was systematically worn down by starvation and also usually by cold. In Sukhanovka prison, there were also hot punishment cells. For example, the Vol.1 punishment cells were entirely unheated. There were radiators in the corridor only, and in this heated corridor the guards on duty walked in felt boots and padded jackets. The prisoner was forced to undress down to his underwear, and sometimes to his undershorts, and he was forced to spend from 3 to 5 days in a punishment cell without moving, since it was so confining. He received hot gruel on the 3rd day only. For the first few minutes you were convinced you'd not be able to last an hour. But by some miracle, a human being would indeed sit out its 5 days, perhaps acquiring in the course of it an illness that would last him the rest of his life. There were various aspects to punishment cells, as for instance, dampness and water. In the Chernovsky prison after the war, Masha G. was kept barefooted for 2 hours and up to her ankles in icy water. Confess, she was 18 years old, and how she feared for her feet. She was going to have to live with them a long time. 25. Should one consider a variation of the punishment cell when a prisoner was locked in an alcove? Should one consider it a variation? As long as 1933. This was one of the ways they tortured Ch.3 in the Khabarovsk GPU. They locked him naked in a concrete alcove in such a way that he could neither bend his knees nor straighten them, and change positions of his arms nor turn his head. And that was not all. They began to drip cold water on his scalp, a classic torture, which they ran down his body in rivulets. They did not inform him, of course, that this would go on for only 24 hours. It was awful enough, at any rate, for him to lose consciousness as he was discovered the next day, apparently dead. He came onto a hospital cot. They had brought him out of his faint with spirits of ammonia, caffeine, and body massage. At first he had no recollection of where he had been or what had happened. For a whole month he was useless even for interrogation. We may be so bold as to assume that this alcove with dripping device had not been devised for Ch.3 alone. In 1949, my Dnipropetrovsk acquaintance had been similarly confined without the dripping attachment, however, on a line joining Khabarovsk in Dnipropetrovsk, and over a period of 16 years. Were there not other such points as well? 26. Starvation. It has already been mentioned in combination with other methods, nor was it an unusual method to starve the prisoner into confession. Actually, the starvation technique, like interrogation at night, was an integral element in the entire system of coercion. The miserly prison bread ration, amounting to 10.5 ounces in the peacetime year of 1933, and to 1 pound in 1945 in the Lubyanka, and permitting or prohibiting food parcels from one's family, and access to commissary were universally applied to everyone. But there was also the technique of intensified hunger. For example, Ch.3 was kept a month on 3.5 ounces of bread, after which, when he had just been brought in from the pit, the interrogator Stalko placed him in front of a pot of thick borscht, and a half loaf of white bread sliced diagonally. Well, what does it even matter, one might ask, how it was sliced? But Ch.3 today will insist that it was really sliced very attractively. However, he was not given anything to eat. How ancient it all is, how medieval, how primitive. The only thing new about it was that it was applied in a socialist society. Others too tell about such tricks. They were often tried, but we are going to cite another case involving Ch.3 because it combined so many methods. They put him in the interrogator's office for 72 hours. The only thing he was allowed was to be taken to the toilet. For the rest, they allowed him neither food nor drink, even though there was water in a carafe right next to him, nor was he permitted to sleep. Throughout, there were 3 interrogators in the office working in shifts, and one kept writing something silently without disturbing the prisoner. The second slept on the sofa, and the third walked around the room. As soon as Ch.3 fell asleep, beat him instantly. Then they switched roles. Maybe they themselves were being punished for failure to deliver, and then all of a sudden they brought Ch.3 a meal, fat Ukrainian borscht, a chopped fried potatoes, a red wine in a crystal carafe. But because Ch.3 had an aversion to alcohol all his life, he refused to drink the wine, and the interrogator couldn't go too far in forcing him to, because that would have spoiled the whole game. After he had eaten, they said to him, "Now, here's what you have testified to in the presence of 2 witnesses. Sign here." In other words, he was to sign that he had been silently composed by one interrogator, to sign what had been silently composed by one interrogator in the presence of another who had been asleep and a third who had been actively working. On the very first page, Ch.3 learned that he had been on intimate terms with all the leading Japanese generals, and that he had received espionage assignments from all of them. He began to cross out whole pages. They beat him up and threw him out. Iine, another Chinese Eastern Railroad man arrested with him, was put through the same thing, but he drank the wine and in a state of pleasant intoxication signed a confession and was shot. Even one tiny glass can have an enormous effect on a famished man, and that was a whole carafe. 27 beatings of a kind that leave no marks. They use rubber truncheons, and they use wooden mallets and small sandbags. And it is very, very painful when they hit a bone, for example, in an interrogator's jackboot on the shin, where the bone lies just beneath the skin. They beat Brigade Commander Karpuch Brevin for 21 days in a row. And today he says, even after 30 years, all my bones ache, and my head too. In recollecting his own experience and the stories of others, he counts up to 52 methods of torture. Here is one. They grip the hand in a special vice so that the prisoner's palms lie flat on the desk, and they hit the joints with the edge of a ruler, and one screams. Should we single out particularly the technique by which teeth are knocked out? They knocked out 8 of Karpunich's. As everyone knows, a blow of the fist to the solar plexus, catching the victim in the middle of a breath, and leaves no mark whatever. The Lefortova Colonel Sidorov, in a post-war period, used to take a penalty kick with his overshoes at the dangling genitals of a male prisoner. Soccer players who at one time or another have been hit in the groin by a ball know what kind of blow what this kind of blow is like. There is no pain comparable to it, and ordinarily the recipient loses consciousness. 28. In Novorossiysk and KBD, they invented a machine for squeezing fingernails. As a result, it could be observed later at the transit prisons that many of those from Novorossiysk had lost their fingernails. 29. And what about the straitjacket? 30. And breaking the prisoner's back. At the same time, Khabarovsk GPU in 1933. 31. Or bridling, also known as the swan dive, is what a Sukhanovka method, also used in Archangel, where the interrogator Evkald applied it in 1940. A long piece of rough toweling was inserted between the prisoner's jaw like a bridle. The ends was then pulled back over his shoulders and tied to his heels. Just try to lay on your stomach like a wheel, with your spine breaking, without food and water for 2 days. Is it necessary to go on with the list? Is there much left to enumerate? What won't idle, well-fed, unfeeling people invent? Brother mine, do not condemn those who, finding themselves in such a situation, turned out to be weak and confessed more than they should have. Do not be the first to cast a stone at them. Thank you for listening.